The sun had not yet risen when Elijah Granger tightened the last strap on his saddlebag and stepped onto the frostbitten earth of Hollow Creek. The wind carried the bite of old ghosts, those that hadn't been buried right, and those that refused to stay buried at all. The land here was dry, stubborn, the kind that cracked instead of bending, just like the people. He pulled his coat tight, leather worn soft by time and gunpowder, and glanced at the road that snaked down past the dead cottonwoods toward a town that hadn't seen peace since before the war. 6 years since he'd left, and already the place felt like a dream gone sour. The letter in his pocket was creased from reading. Just 2 sentences. They killed Ben. Sheriff's no help. Come quick. No signature. None needed. His brother had been the last good man he knew, and now someone had put him in the dirt. Elijah had come to find out who, and to make sure they didn't stay breathing much longer. Hollow Creek looked smaller than he remembered, like the war had stolen a few buildings while no one was looking. The general store leaned left now, and the church's steeple was missing its cross. The saloon still stood proud, drunk on its own reflection in the cracked window panes. Elijah tied his horse outside and stepped in. Smoke, whiskey, silence. A few heads turned, fewer stayed turned. At the bar, the same man wiped the same glass with the same greasy rag. He didn't speak. Elijah didn't need him to. He walked past, boots dragging dust and lines like scars, and found a table near the back, his back to the wall, eyes on the door. A woman with smoke in her voice brought him coffee that tasted like metal. She didn't ask who he was, but someone else did. "You don't look like trouble," came a voice, low and slow. "But that coat says otherwise." Elijah looked up. A deputy, young, clean-shaven, eyes too green for this much dust. Star on his vest shined too much. New badge or new boy? "You the one they sent in place of a sheriff?" Elijah asked, voice gravel and heat. "No, sir," the deputy said. "Sheriff Tillman's still the law. I just help where I can." "You help bury my brother?" Elijah's tone was flat. No one spoke. Even the piano player stopped pretending to tune his keys. The deputy flinched, just a flicker. "Wasn't much to bury," he said after a beat. "They left him in the creek. Took 3 days to find him. Town figured it was bandits. Town figured wrong." Elijah stood slow, taller than the deputy, meaner too. He walked past, left coins on the table, stepped back into the street, where the sun had finally crested the hills, throwing long red shadows like open wounds. Across the way, a child stared at him from behind a horse trough. The look in her eyes was old, too old. Hollow Creek had rot in its bones. He found Ben's grave outside the church, unmarked but fresh, soil still raised and raw. He knelt, touched, the dirt like it could answer him. "I'm here," he said. "I'll find them." A bootstep crunched behind him. He stood without turning. The preacher's voice came soft. "He didn't die alone." "I was there to close his eyes." Elijah nodded once. "What did he say?" "Said your name. Then said it wasn't over. Land." "Then what?" Elijah turned. The preacher just shook his head. Sometimes the devil don't need a reason. Elijah stared at the town past the graves. Something moved in the wind, maybe smoke, maybe memory. But something else moved, too. Eyes in windows. Whispers behind doors. They knew something, and by sundown, so would he. Elijah left the graveyard without looking back. The wind had shifted, rolling in from the south now, thick with smoke from a cook fire that didn't belong to any homestead he remembered. He followed it past the mercantile, past the boarded-up jailhouse, until he reached the edge of town where the dirt turned red, and the grass gave up trying. There was a house here once, his brother's house. Now it was only bones, a chimney still standing like a gravestone, and ash crushed into the earth. Scorched boards, shattered glass, a boot print in the mud still soft enough to remember the shape of the man who left it. Elijah crouched beside it. Too narrow for Ben, too clean for ranch work. A rider, probably. Or worse, someone with money. He rose slowly, spine aching with memories, and turned toward the sound of a horse approaching. Slow. The rider was a woman. She moved like she'd always known how to stay alive. Coat buckled high, hat low, rifle tied across the saddle. She didn't speak until she was a dozen feet away. "You're Elijah?" Not a question. "You watched him die?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I watched them ride away." He stepped closer. "Names?" "I ain't got them." "Then give me something." She hesitated, eyes flicking toward the burned wreckage of Ben's house. "He was with a woman," she said finally. "Real quiet type. Black hair, wore a red scarf. Left town 2 nights before the fire. Folks said he was helping her run." Elijah's stomach tightened. "Run from who?" "Didn't ask," she said. "But the ones that came looking had. Law badges and outlaw hands. Weren't here for justice." She turned her horse without saying more. Elijah watched her go until the dust swallowed her silhouette. Back in town, the saloon was busier now. Men with hats pulled low and hands resting just a little too close to holsters. Elijah stepped through the swinging doors like he belonged to the floorboards. He didn't speak to anyone. He walked straight to the table where an older man sat alone, eyes cloudy, shirt stained with whiskey and time. Jed Collins. He'd been a tracker once, before the bottle took more than age ever could. "You found him, didn't you?" Elijah asked. Jed didn't move, just nodded once, slow. "They tied him to the post out by the North Fork," he rasped. "Left him there 2 nights. Weren't about killing. Was about watching him die." Elijah's fists clenched. "Why?" Jed looked up for the first time. He helped the wrong girl. Outside, the wind carried a different kind of silence. The kind that wraps a noose before you even realize you're standing on the trapdoor. Elijah walked past the store, past the schoolhouse, until he reached the edge of town again. There was a black horse tethered by the trough. Fine saddle, polished. Spurs. He didn't recognize the rider, but he knew the type. The man stepped out from the shadow of the stable, chewing something that wasn't tobacco. His coat was too clean, his eyes too dry. "You're the brother," the man said. Elijah nodded. "You one of the ones that came calling?" The man smiled without showing teeth. "I'm one of the ones still here." Elijah stepped forward. "Then you'll do." The punch came fast and dirty. Elijah dropped him with a left to the ribs and a right that cracked bone. The town didn't stop him. Nobody stepped in. When the man finally spoke, it was with blood on his teeth and fear in his voice. "She was supposed to be property." He coughed. "But Ben took her anyway. Said she was free. Said she had a name. Elijah hauled him up. What name? I don't know, the man gasped. She had a scar down her left cheek. Rode like fire. They said she was Ute. They said she had family still hunting. Elijah let him drop. The wind howled through. The alley like it had a throat and a warning. A woman with a scar. A brother who helped her run. A house burned to the ground. And a town too scared to speak until the dead came back to ask the questions. He would find her, or find who hunted her. Either way, blood would follow. Elijah rode north at dawn, the sun still crawling up behind the hills, like it was ashamed to show its face. The old trail forked beyond the ridge, one side heading toward Carson's Bluff, the other toward the mines long abandoned since the river turned sour. He took the bluff path. Word was that a woman with a scar and a red scarf had been seen passing through 3 nights ago, heading that way. The horse moved steady under him, hooves thudding a rhythm that matched the fire building behind his ribs. Ben hadn't just died. He'd been made an example for helping someone no one else thought deserved help. That kind of death didn't sit quiet in the ground. It screamed in the bones of the living. By midday he reached an old stage stop, half fallen, but still upright enough for ghosts and desperate men. A boy sat out front, whittling wood into nothing. Elijah dismounted slow. You see a woman pass through here? The boy squinted up at him. Maybe. Scar down her cheek. Red scarf. Rides hard. The boy nodded. She came through with a man. Not like you. Snake-looking, leather coat, gold tooth. Said they were heading to Widow's Peak? Elijah's jaw clenched. Widow's Peak was outlaw country. No sheriff, no law, no luck. Did she look hurt? No, the boy said. She looked mad. He rode again, harder this time. The land peeled back like old scabs. Dry gulches, broken fences, bones, bleached by years of sun. When he reached Widow's Peak, the world narrowed. A few buildings squatted in the dust like they knew better than to stand tall. A saloon, a smithy, maybe a brothel that had forgotten its name. He tied the horse, dusted off his coat, and walked into the saloon. Heat, smoke, and silence met him like old friends with knives in their sleeves. At the far end, a woman sat alone. Black braid, red scarf, scar curling from her cheek like lightning. She looked up before he even reached her. You're Ben's brother. Elijah stopped cold. And you're the reason he's dead. Her eyes narrowed. He's dead because he thought I deserved a choice. Elijah stared at her, something in his chest, nodding. Tell me what happened. She nodded once. Name's Luan. They sold me east of Carson Ridge, passed me around like stock. Ben found me outside Hollow Creek. I'd escaped. He didn't ask for anything. Just gave me food, bandaged my feet, told me I didn't have to go back. She sipped from a tin cup. Then he burned the papers that marked. Elijah said, No, you're here to burn what's left of the past. Everett waved a hand. I paid Greeley, paid Morrow, paid half the men you've killed. You think that ledger scares me? No, Elijah replied, but I think the graves behind your barn might. Everett's eyes twitched. We sent word to the marshals, Luan said, stepping out of the shadows. They'll be here before sundown. And the boy? Everett asked. Daniel stepped forward, revolver trembling in both hands. You don't get to pretend we're ghosts anymore. Everett chuckled once. You bring a child to a reckoning? Elijah leaned close. No, we brought your future. The old man drew fast, but not fast enough. Elijah shot him through the hip. Luan fired again. Leg. They didn't kill him. Not yet. Some men deserved to crawl. By the time the marshals arrived, they found Everett in his study, tied to the desk, bleeding and shouting names that meant nothing now. Daniel handed them the ledger. Page 73, he said. That's where the murders start. They rode out as the noose was raised. No speeches, no fires, just silence. The kind of silence only justice can buy. 3 weeks later, the ledger was nearly spent. Names crossed out, circled, or buried. Only a few remained, and most of them were ghosts already. But there was one more, Roscoe Vale, a man with no land, no title, and no face in the papers, but whose initials appeared again and again in the margins. R.V., always beside the highest payouts, always where things went worst. They tracked him by rumor through canyon country. He'd once been a Pinkerton, then a bounty broker, then something worse, a middleman for killers. A whisper passed in gambling dens and war camps. Elijah knew. His type. Men like Vale didn't die in shootouts. They vanished, and so to catch him, they needed bait. They made themselves visible, stopping in towns under their real names, letting the stories spread. Lucian wore Ben's old red scarf like a flag. Daniel asked questions he knew would reach the wrong ears. Elijah waited, patient as a snake. It worked. One night in a town called Bitter Nest, they found the trap already set. They walked into the inn expecting supper. Instead, they found 5 men waiting, clean coats, sharp smiles, and in the center, sipping tea like it was wine, sat Roscoe Vale. He didn't stand, just smiled. Elijah Granger, he said, been watching your trail for months. You're a storm pretending to be a man. Elijah stayed still. And you're the rot behind the curtain. Rut pays well, Vale said. You could have walked away, you know. Took the badge, made some noise, maybe even got a monument. But no, you wanted it all to fall. I wanted them to answer. Vale leaned back. They did. Most of them. What's left now is just ash and politics. You keep digging, all you'll find is dirt that no one wants uncovered. Then, we'd bury it in the light. The room tensed. Guns were drawn, 6 barrels aimed at them. Daniel's hand hovered over his holster. Lucian's rifle was still slung, too far to matter. Then Elijah smiled. You brought 6 men. Vale raised an eyebrow. Is that not enough? Depends, Elijah said, on how fast ghosts can shoot. The windows shattered. Riders poured in, marshals from Santa Fe, Holden's men, local lawmen who'd ridden hard through the canyons for days. They'd followed the letters Elijah sent ahead, sealed with Greeley's own wax. The trap had sprung both ways. The firefight lasted only seconds. Vale tried to run. Luan tackled him through the window. He clawed for a knife, but she drove her boot into his throat and held it there until he choked on blood and dirt. He died, staring at the sky as if he couldn't believe he wasn't immune. Afterward, Elijah picked up the last copy of the ledger and crossed out RV. Is that the end? Daniel asked, panting. Elijah shook his head. No, but it's the last of the bad ones. Luan stood, brushing glass from her coat. So what do we do now? Elijah looked out at the horizon, where the river curved like a scar through the earth. We give the rest back, he said. Back to who? To the people it was stolen from. That night they burned the last pages of the ledger, not out of guilt, but to keep them from being used again. And in the ashes they saw something new, not revenge, but return. They followed the river for days after Vale's death, not fleeing, just drifting. The ledger was gone, but the weight of it still clung to them like dust that wouldn't wash off. They passed through towns where their names sparked nods or silence. No gunfire followed them now, only questions, and sometimes gratitude. In a place called Ember Hollow, they gave the last of Greeley's stolen money to a school teacher whose brother had vanished for refusing to sell land. In Deadwater, they handed off land titles to a black preacher who'd buried half his congregation and still found the strength to forgive. In Willow Point, they gave nothing at all, just rode through, letting the children see what it looked like when justice didn't wear a uniform. By then, Daniel had grown taller. His voice cracked when he spoke. He rode with his shoulders square, and his pistol rarely left his side, not because he expected a fight, but because he'd earned it. He was no longer a boy, not quite a man, but something in between, shaped by fire and choice. One evening, as they camped beside a crumbling bridge, Daniel asked, "Do we stop now?" Elijah looked into the fire, silent for a long moment. "Stopping and ending ain't the same. So this doesn't end?" "It ends," Luwan said, "but not because someone else tells us to." She stood, took the badge from Elijah's saddlebag, and tossed it into the flames. It hissed, blackened, vanished. "We were never law," she said. "We were just the consequence." They left the next morning without direction. Daniel chose the trail for once, leading them south toward the mesas that cut the sky into broken glass. They passed fewer towns, fewer people. Eventually they came to a high place above the desert, a ridge with wind-carved stones and a view that stretched for days. There Elijah dismounted, took a shovel from his pack, began to dig. Luwan watched in silence. Daniel joined without asking. They'd buried the last of it, the scraps of letters, Ben's red scarf, a rusted revolver. That had taken too many lives. Not to forget, but to let go. At sunset, Elijah said a few words, not prayers, just names. Ben, Ridley, the ones they failed, the ones they saved. Luwan placed a single stone on the grave. Daniel lit a lantern and left it burning beside it. As night fell, they sat together for the last time. No words, just the hum of the wind and the fire's slow breathing. The sky above them turned black and endless, and for once they didn't reach for their guns when an owl cried out across the canyon. When dawn came, only tracks remained. 3 horses, riding toward nothing, riding toward everything, and behind them the west, vast, scarred, and maybe, just maybe, healing. Where you paid not to be noticed. They ditched the horses outside the main gate, walked in as traders. Luwan wrapped her hair. Elijah wore gloves to hide the bruising in his knuckles. Daniel kept close, quiet, and quick. They found Morrow's estate on the northern bluff, 4 stories tall, all brass and stained glass, with a private trained spur and guards at every door. But Elijah wasn't looking for the front. He found the stable boy first, paid him with a silver dollar and a warning not to speak. The kid pointed them toward the back house, where Morrow met with his men, 3 nights a week, never armed. Too rich to need a gun, they waited for night. The wind picked up again, howling through the alley like it remembered who they were. Lu Wan stood watch as Elijah and Daniel slipped through the garden. A window cracked open. The sound of laughter. Morrow's voice. Arrogant, bored. Elijah raised the rifle. "You sure?" Daniel asked. "No," Elijah said, "but I'm tired of being sure. It's time we start making the stories." The shot rang out like truth tearing the sky in half. The shot cracked like judgment, cutting through velvet curtains and polished glass. Inside, Silas Morrow's voice caught mid-sentence. A spray of wine splattered across his ivory vest as he dropped forward, dead before his face hit the oak table. Panic followed. Chairs overturned. Men scrambled. But Elijah was already gone, out the window, boots thudding in perfect rhythm. Daniel sprinting behind him through the garden path they'd studied all afternoon. Luzine fired twice from the alleyway. One guard fell. The other ducked and shouted into the darkness, but he didn't give chase. Not in Durango. Not with blood that expensive. They didn't run after killers here. They closed the doors and rewrote the story. By the time anyone sounded the alarm, the 3 of them were already in the warehouse district, horses saddled, trail planned. Daniel mounted up, face white with disbelief. "We just shot the governor's cousin." "No," Elijah said. "We just shot the man who paid for bodies to disappear. Let them decide if it matters who he was." They rode until their lungs burned, past the silver lines of the mountains, past mining towns asleep in ignorance, past crossroads marked by forgotten crosses. That night they camped in the ruins of an old chapel. The roof was long gone, the walls black with soot, but the altar still stood. Someone had carved names. Into it dozens, maybe hundreds, names of the lost. Daniel stared at them by firelight. "You think we're doing the right thing?" Luchun turned slowly. "Does it feel wrong?" He shrugged. "I don't know what it's supposed to feel like anymore." Elijah tossed another log onto the fire. "Right doesn't feel like anything. It's just what's left when you run." Out of excuses, they sat in silence for a long time. Then Elijah pulled out the badge again, turned it in his hand. "We're not ghosts anymore," he said. "Not hiding. Not bleeding for someone else's comfort. If they want a story, let's give them one they can't burn." Leon smiled. "You sound like Ben." He looked down at the badge. "He's still with me, just doesn't speak as loud." The next day, the news reached them before noon. A rider from Carson's Bluff passed them on the trail, breathless. "You hear what happened?" he asked. "Silas Morrow's dead. Shot through the heart. People say it was vengeance. Say the ghost of Hollow Creek finally came knocking." Elijah just nodded. "Sounds like a good story." "They're sending marshals from Santa Fe," the rider added. "They're coming to clean house. People are starting to talk about justice, about names that were never meant to be remembered." As the rider galloped off, Luan looked at Elijah. "You believe it?" He thought for a moment. "I believe it started." They reached a high ridge by sundown, the kind where the horizon wraps around you like a promise too big to hold. Below them the valley stretched wide, towns scattered like freckles on old skin. "Where now?" Daniel asked. Elijah took one last look at the road behind them, then he pointed forward. "South. There's a sheriff in Black Hollow who let 6 families disappear without asking a single question. He's next." "And after that?" Luan asked. "Whoever thought they were safe?" The wind picked up again, warmer this time, carrying not just dust, but something else, memory and reckoning. Black Hollow wasn't on most maps. Too small, too crooked, too full of secrets no one wanted told. It sat low between 2 mesas, a mining town turned graveyard, still breathing out smoke from tunnels no one dared crawl into anymore. The streets were narrow, the buildings weathered, wooden faces hiding rot beneath the paint. But the saloon was open, and the sheriff's office had fresh nails on its door. They rode in under morning haze, Elijah with his coat drawn tight, Luan behind him, Daniel trailing on a smaller horse he'd named Whistle for the way it breathed through a crooked nostril. No one stopped them. No one greeted them either. Elijah dismounted in front of the general store, tying his horse slow, eyes scanning the windows. "See that?" he muttered. "No kids, no dogs, just stairs." Luan nodded. "This town smells like fear." The sheriff's office was set back from the main road, beneath an old oak tree twisted sideways by too many dry seasons. The name, Sheriff Gantz, was painted on the glass, peeling and sun-faded. Inside, a man leaned back in a chair with boots on the desk. Mustache thick, gut thicker. A badge gleamed on his chest. His eyes lifted as they entered, calm as still water. "Well, now, strangers with hard eyes, I assume you ain't here for supplies. We're here for answers," Elijah said. "That so?" Gantz smiled. "Funny, I just ran out of those." Luan stepped forward. 6 families disappeared. In Black Hollow last winter. Whole line of cabins burned to the dirt. "You file any reports?" The sheriff shrugged. "Fires happen, snow comes heavy. Accidents mostly. Accidents don't leave boot tracks heading north with wagons full." "Of furniture," Elijah said. He dropped the copy of the ledger onto the desk. "Your name's in there, 3 payments, coinciding with the disappearances. Paid by Silas Morrow." Gantz's smile faltered. Just for a second. Then it returned, tighter. "That's supposed." "To scare me?" "No," Elijah said. "The rope I'm holding outside might." The door creaked behind them. 2 men entered, marshals, real ones, dust-covered and worn, but badges bright and papers in hand. One of them nodded to Elijah. "We got your word from Durango." Judge Holden signed off. "We've been tracking Gantz for weeks. Just needed the final piece." Gantz stood slowly. "You don't know who you're messing with. We do," Luan said. "That's why we're here." The marshals cuffed him and led him out, ignoring his spitting curses and threats. Townsfolk began to gather. Whispers spread. Some looked relieved, others just confused. But something shifted in the air, a thread loosened. That night a woman knocked on their door. Mid-30s, weather-beaten. She held a rusted locket and a letter burned at the corners. "You really got him?" she asked. Elijah nodded. "He won't hurt anyone again. My brother vanished last winter. His kids, too. No one would talk to me." She held the locket out. This was theirs. Found it behind Gantz's barn. Never told a soul, until now. Luan took the locket gently. We'll carry it." Before dawn they left, quietly, no banners, no cheers. As they rode south again, Daniel looked back. That town, it might change now, or it might not, Elijah said. "But we lit a match, and matches spread," Luan added. The horizon opened wide ahead, like the land itself was asking where next. Elijah smiled faintly. "Wherever the ledger leads." The next name on the ledger was circled in red ink, shaky handwriting pressed hard into the paper, as if the writer had hated even putting it down. Malcolm Everett, rancher, railbacker, and war profiteer. His holdings spanned 5 counties, and his reach extended further. Unlike Greeley or Morrow, Everett didn't dirty his hands. He bought men who already had blood on theirs. His ranch sat on high land north of San Huron, surrounded by cottonwood groves and wide cattle trails cut into the land like veins. But Elijah wasn't interested in his cattle. He was interested in the creek behind the barn, the place where 6 unmarked graves had been rumored to lie since the war ended. They approached under fog, days after leaving Black Hollow, the world still damp with memory. Luan had picked up a new carbine in Hollow Bend, a gift from a tanner who lost his, son to Everett's hired men. Daniel rode ahead now, scouting, sharper than he had any right to be for a boy still growing into his bones. From a ridge they saw the estate, sprawling white fences, 3 barns, guards on horseback. Too many for a ranch. Not enough for an army. Elijah studied them through glass. Hired guns. Not locals. See the way they hold their reins? Mercenaries? "What's the plan?" Daniel asked. "We go in," Elijah said, "but not through the front." That night they circled around the creek. The graves weren't rumors. They were real, shallow mounds under the cottonwoods, marked by nothing but erosion. Luan knelt and brushed away dirt, bits of cloth, bone, shell casings. She cursed low. "He's been burying evidence for years." Elijah stared at the graves. These men weren't enemies. They were competition. They made their move before dawn. Daniel slipped into the barn under shadow, cut the stirrups, soaked the tack with lard. Luan took the east tower, dropping the first sentry with a silenced round and jamming the bell rope with a splintered wedge. Elijah walked straight to the porch. Everett met him there, already dressed in black, like he'd been expecting his own funeral. "Elijah Granger," he said, voice like velvet over rust. I wondered how long it'd take. "I'm not here for talk." Slowly. "You all right?" "He winged me," Elijah muttered, blood running down his arm. "But I'm still standing." She helped him sit as flames roared higher behind them, spitting sparks like warnings into the sky. They watched the rest of Harker's men scatter, shadows on horseback, fleeing from a fire they hadn't expected, from a war they just lost. Later, when the sun finally climbed over the blackened horizon, they buried Harker beneath the charred ruins of the office. No marker, no words, just ash. By midday, Sparrow Ridge was nothing but cinders and bones. The fire had taken the last of the roof, and smoke still curled from the blackened ruins, like ghosts not ready to let go. Elijah's wound was bound tight under Luan's steady hands, though the bullet had dug deep enough to make his right arm near useless. He didn't complain. Pain had long since taken a back seat to purpose. They saddled their horses in silence. Neither spoke of the fight. Neither had to. Harker was dead. But Greeley wasn't. Not yet. As they turned south toward Carson's Bluff, a lone rider appeared on the horizon, dust trailing behind like a war drum's echo. Elijah's hand went for his pistol, but the figure raised a hand, palm open, and slowed. It was Daniel. The boy was different now, face streaked with grit, eyes sharpened with things no child should see. He slid off the horse before it even stopped moving and shoved a folded letter into Elijah's hand. They listened, he said, breathless. Judge Holden read everything. Names, ledgers, your statement. He issued warrants. Real ones. For Greeley, for 2 of his men. Even some names I didn't recognize. Luwan took the letter from Elijah's hand and read quickly. Her lips curled into something close to a smile. This is real, she said. They're coming for him. Elijah stared at the seal at the bottom, the kind of ink that could only be pressed by men who still believed paper meant something. When? Tomorrow, Daniel said. They're sending riders from 3 towns, U.S. Marshals. Judge? Want you there. Wants us to testify? Luwan asked. Want you to watch, the boy said. So people remember who stood up first. They rode together that night, all 3 of them, toward Greeley's estate. No longer ghosts, no longer rebels hiding in the dark, but fire, walking. The hills bent wide and green as they neared the valley, and already Elijah could see the change. Riders patrolled the fences now, but not Greeley's men, real lawmen. Blue coats with badges that glinted like sunlight on water. At the edge of the estate, a marshal stopped them. Names? Elijah nodded. Granger. Luwan, that's Daniel. The man looked them over, then stepped aside. Judge Holden's in the main house. He's expecting you. The mansion stood like a wounded king, too proud to admit it had been wrong, too hollow now to pretend otherwise. Inside, Greeley sat at a long oak table, his hands bound in front of him. 2 marshals flanked his shoulders. His once slick hair was damp with sweat, eyes dull with disbelief. You think this fixes anything? He hissed. You think dirt farmers and half-breeds get to tear down the world I built? Luwan stepped forward. The world you built was made from stolen names and broken backs. She dropped the ledger. On the table in front of him. Now it'll be your tombstone. Judge Holden entered, robes dragging dust, voice like gravel turned gospel. You will stand trial, he said to Greeley, in front of the people you once bought, and they will decide what justice means. Greeley spat. You think they'll hang me? I own too much. Elijah stepped beside him, calm, cold. Not anymore. They left the estate at afternoon as a noose was raised in the town square, not for revenge but for remembrance, not to celebrate a death, but to remind the living what silence had cost. As they rode out, Elijah looked back one last time. Greeley would face judgment. The town would write new names on its walls. Ben's name, Luwan's, even Daniel's, and his own, maybe not as a gun, not as a killer, but as a man who came home not to bury his brother, but to raise the truth in his place. The road away from Greeley's estate felt different now. Not lighter, not easier, just quieter, as if the land itself had exhaled after holding its breath too long. The marshals would see the sentence through. The judge had given his word. Elijah didn't trust many men anymore, but he'd seen something honest in Holden's eyes. That would have to be enough. They rode without speaking for hours, following the river as it bent south toward nowhere in particular. The spring rains had finally come, softening the banks and turning the dust to clay. The world was waking up again, but Elijah wasn't sure if he was ready to. At dusk they made camp near a bluff overlooking the valley. Luwan sat by the fire, sharpening her knife slowly, like she needed something to do with her hands. Daniel gathered kindling, his small frame shadowed by the flames. Elijah stared out across the hills, his arms still stiff, ribs sore from the fight. But the wound that hurt most wasn't made by a bullet. "Do you think it's over?" Daniel asked, dropping a bundle of sticks onto the pile. Elijah didn't answer right away. For Greeley, maybe. For us? He shook his head. Things like this don't end. They just change names. Luwan looked up. "You ever gonna go back to Hollow Creek?" Elijah's jaw tightened. Ain't nothing left there but ashes. He poked at the fire with a stick, watching embers rise into the dark like ghosts finally finding the sky. "Ben's buried. The house is gone. I'd rather ride forward than stare at smoke." Daniel leaned back against a rock. "What about you?" he asked Luwan. "Where will you go?" She didn't speak for a long time. Then, "I don't know. I've been running so long I forgot what it means to stop." She turned to Elijah. "You still carrying your brother's badge?" He nodded, reaching into his coat. It was tarnished, now dull at the edges, but heavy in the hand. He passed it to her. She studied it for a moment. "You could wear it, you know. I'm no lawman," he said. "You were more law than any man I ever met back in Hollow Creek." "That's not saying much," he muttered. Lujan smiled faintly and handed it back. "Then maybe don't wear it for the law. Wear it for what law's supposed to mean." That night Elijah dreamed of Ben for the first time in weeks. Not as a corpse, not as a memory, but alive, laughing under the cottonwoods, one hand on the reins, the other holding a letter he never got to send. He woke before dawn, heart tight, air thick with memory. The fire was still warm. Daniel was asleep, curled beneath a blanket. Luwan sat on a rock, facing east, eyes on the rising sun. Elijah joined her, said nothing, just sat. They listened to the wind shift through the grass. Somewhere down the trail, a hawk screamed into the morning. "What now?" she asked softly. Elijah took a deep breath. "Now we ride." "Where?" He looked down the long trail ahead, winding between hills and ghosts, past fences and forgotten names. "Wherever needs remembering." They packed what little they had, mounted up, and rode east into the sunlight. No destination, no map, just a promise carried in silence that justice might never be perfect, but it could still leave a trail behind for others to follow. And as the last of Sparrow Ridge vanished behind them, Elijah Granger didn't look back. Not this time. The trail east took them through country, both wide and scarred. Hills rippling with old fire lines, riverbeds choked with stone and silence, towns barely clinging to the idea of themselves. Every stop was a test. Some folk looked away when they saw Luson. Some stared too long. Most said nothing at all. But in a way that silence was familiar and survivable. Elijah carried the badge now. Not on his chest, never there, but in his saddlebag, wrapped in oilcloth beside the letter Judge Holden had written, an open endorsement to any marshal or circuit rider who asked questions. That letter got them water when they needed it, shelter when the sky broke open. But it didn't get them answers. That part still came with blood. They followed rumors. A rancher outside Red Gorge said Greeley had partners in Texas territory, men who ran stock south and girls north. A merchant's wife in dead saddle swore her husband vanished after refusing a land offer from someone named Toth, a name Luwan, recognized from the ledgers. And everywhere Elijah saw it, the same sickness. Money, power, silence. A pattern painted in dust and fear. It was in a town called Hollow Bend that the pattern cracked. They rode in just after rain, not heavy, but enough to wash the filth into the ditches. Mud clung to their boots as they tied the horses and approached the tavern. Inside, warmth and stale beer. A card game in the corner. A piano player tapping out something tired and familiar. Behind the bar, a man with gray in his beard and a shotgun within reach. Elijah set the badge on the counter. "We're looking for Elias Toth." The barkeep froze, then laughed once, dry. "You're late." "Explain." "He's dead." Lucien leaned forward. "Who killed him?" "Depends who you ask," the man said. "Some say a woman with a scar and a fire in her eye. Others say it was one of his own men. I say, doesn't matter. He's 6 feet down and no one mourned him." Elijah exhaled. "Any other names tied to Greeley still breathing?" "One." The barkeep poured a shot, slid it down the bar. "Governor's cousin. Silas Morrow. Runs freight out of Durango. Owns half the state in paper, none of it in sweat. Thinks the world owes him a crown. He connected to Toth?" Luwan asked. "Toth was his teeth," the man said. "Greeley was the tongue. They left at first light. Durango sat in the lap of the mountains like a smug beast. Tall houses. Painted walls, guards at every corner. Not soldiers. Not lawmen. Private muscle with clean coats and ugly hearts. The type of town." "So why'd you run?" "'Cause I saw too much. I found one of the letters they were gonna burn. Said your name on it," he said, looking at Elijah. "Said if you came snooping, you were to be dealt with like your brother." "Elijah's." Blood ran cold. "Who signed it?" "Just initials, C.H." Luwan exhaled sharply. "Clayton Harker." "You know him?" Elijah asked. "He's worse than Ridley," she said. "Lawman by name, hired knife by trade. Used to work the border towns, running girls and guns. Greeley bought him a badge years back." Elijah stood, began pacing. "If Harker's coming, we've got less time than I thought." Daniel looked. Up, panic rising. "I shouldn't have come. If they know I talked—" "They don't," Elijah said firmly. "But they will," Luwan added, grim. Elijah crouched beside the boy. "You want this to end?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Then stay quiet and stay close." They moved before dawn. Elijah figured they had 2, maybe 3 days before Harker made a move. And Harker didn't do mercy. They needed proof. Names, signatures, anything that could rip Greeley's mask off in front of the men he hadn't yet paid off. Daniel knew of a storage shed near the rear paddock. "He keeps old documents there," he said. "Deeds, contracts, maybe even payroll records. Nobody guards it. Everyone thinks it's just hay." "Hay don't need a lock," Elijah muttered, "but secrets do." That night they rode in under moonlight black as burnt oil. The ranch shimmered below them in silver lines of fence and torchlight. Elijah split them into two, he and Daniel. For the shed, Luan circling east to cover the stable in case someone noticed. The silence was thick, broken only by the creak of leather and the wind whispering warnings they tried not to hear. They reached the shed with little trouble. Daniel picked the lock with surprising ease. "Used to sneak tobacco," he muttered. Inside, the smell hit first, dust, mold, and old money. Stacks of boxes lined the walls, bundles of parchment tied with string, seals broken and faded. Elijah moved fast. Letters, lists, names, dates. Then he found it, a ledger. He flipped, through, jaw tightening with each turn. Dozens of entries. Payments made for removals, transfers, property clearance. Ben Granger's name was there. So was Luan's. And then something more. A letter addressed to Harker, dated 2 days ago. Riders confirmed. Execute at discretion. Ensure the girl doesn't leave the territory. Elijah slipped the paper into his coat just as Daniel froze. "Someone's coming," the boy whispered. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Elijah blew out the lantern. 3 shadows appeared. Outside the window, rifles across their chests. One of them spoke. "Boss says the girl's gone. Said if we find the boy, shoot first." Daniel went pale. Elijah pulled him back into the dark, hand over his mouth. The men circled the shed. Luan wasn't here yet. Either she hadn't seen them, or they'd gotten to her first. Then a gunshot cracked the night. Not close, but not far. Another followed. Then silence. The men at the door turned sharply. One of them shouted, "Over there," and took off into the brush. The others followed. Elijah grabbed Daniel's arm. "Run." They bolted, slipping through the fence line, boots sliding on dry earth. Gunfire sparked again in the hills, followed by a scream. Luan's scream. Elijah turned toward the sound, fury rising fast. "Stay with the horses," he barked at Daniel, and disappeared into the trees, rifle ready, the letter burning like a brand against his chest. Elijah moved like a shadow with teeth, every step fast and low, boots kissing dirt, rifle gripped. Tight as the night split with another scream, this time sharper, closer. He crested a ridge and spotted the flash of a lantern swinging below. 3 riders. One on foot now, dragging something, someone. Luan. Her arms were bound, face bloodied. But her eyes burned like coals in the dark. She wasn't begging. She wasn't crying. She was waiting. Elijah dropped to one knee, drew breath slow, and took aim. First shot cracked through the quiet like thunder punching through glass. The man dragging her fell forward, a hole between his shoulders. The other 2 scattered, one firing wildly, the other trying to run. Elijah chambered the next round and fired again. A second man crumpled. The third vanished into brush, leaving only the sound of his horse's panicked retreat. He ran to her, cut the rope fast. "You good?" "They hit harder than they ride," she muttered, wiping blood from her cheek. "You get the ledger?" "Got enough to bury Greeley and Harker in the same pit." She looked up, dazed but smiling. "Then we're halfway done." They limped back to the horses, Daniel still there, eyes wide, hands white-knuckled on the reins. "I thought you were both dead." Elijah glanced at the sky. "We're not that lucky." Dawn was starting to stretch fingers over the hills. They didn't stop. They couldn't. By mid-morning, they'd reached the edge of Sparrow Ridge, a mining town turned ghost town, now only remembered by vultures and the dead it held. Elijah knew the place, knew it had one thing they needed: silence. They holed up in an old assay office, barricading the door with a desk and broken crate. Lucien stitched her own cut in the corner, while Elijah laid out the ledger. Names, numbers, transactions, each one a nail in a coffin Greeley hadn't built yet, but would soon lie in. "You really think this'll be enough?" she asked. Elijah didn't look up. "No, but I think it'll make a damn fine start. And Harker? He's not a man who runs," Elijah said. "He'll come." Luan leaned back, wincing. "Then we wait?" "No," he said. "We send it first." That afternoon, Daniel rode hard for Carson's Bluff, carrying copies of the ledger pages, instructions for the circuit judge, a list of Greeley's bribes, Harker's killings, every name he could copy in time. "You'll be safe there," Elijah told him. "Tell them the truth, loud." The boy hesitated before mounting. "You're not coming?" "We'll hold the line," Luan said, "if there's a line left to hold." Daniel disappeared down the trail, dust trailing behind him like a prayer that might not reach far enough. Elijah watched him go. "He's got guts," he said. "Yeah," Luan replied, "but he's still a kid. So were we once. I don't think I ever was." They spent the evening fortifying the office, laid rifles across the windows, booby-trapped the rear path with broken glass and rusty nails. Luan rigged a lantern with a string and a nail, a trick from her days in outlaw camps. "It'll rattle before they're close," she explained. Elijah carved a notch into his revolver's grip for Ben, for Ridley, for the kid he used to be. "What if no one comes?" she asked. "Then we ride to Greeley's front porch and knock like we own the place." The wind howled that night, long and low, the kind of wind that remembers things. Elijah didn't sleep. Neither did Luan. They sat back to back, guns resting on knees, listening to the old wood creak, and the night hold its breath. Just after midnight, the lantern rattled. Elijah stood, rifle up. "They're here." The rattling stopped. Then came the silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the thick, poisonous sort that hangs in the air before something bad happens. The kind Elijah had learned to recognize in battlefields and burning towns. He stepped to the window, careful not to break the darkness with his breath. Outside, shadows moved across the brush like ink in water. 3, no 5, more behind. Too smooth for outlaws, too slow for amateurs, professionals. Harker brought his best, Elijah whispered. Lugene loaded her rifle in the corner. "Then let's make sure he leaves with less." She had a fresh bandage across her temple, blood crusted beneath it. Her eyes didn't blink when she spoke, didn't flinch when the first shot cracked through the night, a warning round that punched through the upper window like a fist made of iron. Elijah dropped low, returned fire twice. A scream followed. 1 down, 4 to go. They didn't rush the cabin. No. These men were methodical, trained. They spread out, flanked both sides, cutting angles across the shack like they'd drawn blueprints of it. Luan spotted one crawling through brush near the well. She fired. Missed. Elijah shouted, "Lantern!" She yanked the string. The lantern swung wide and shattered against the front porch. erupting in sudden flame. The fire roared up the dry wood like it had been waiting for an excuse to live. For a moment the chaos shifted in their favor. Shadows flinched. One man stumbled into view. Elijah didn't hesitate. Shot to the throat. Then he ran, busted through the back door into the night. Luwan followed. They ducked behind the coal chute, breath hot and shallow. Smoke billowed behind them as the office burned, shedding light and madness into the trees. Then came the voice, calm, cold, familiar. You can't outrun it, Granger. Clayton Harker. He stepped into the firelight like it was a stage. Long black duster, clean boots, a star pinned to his chest that meant nothing and everything. His revolver hung loose at his side, casual, like death itself was just another draw. You shot Ridley, he said. You stirred up trouble. You rode in thinking grief makes you righteous. Elijah stood, slowly. I rode in because my brother died for helping someone who deserved more than a collar and a brand. Harker nodded. He made a choice. So did you. I chose order. You chose noise. Lucian stepped beside Elijah. You chose profit. We chose people. Harker tilted his head. You think you're special? You're just another name on the page, just another mess to clean up. Then come clean it, Elijah said. Harker didn't flinch, he drew. So did Elijah. 2 shots rang out. One body fell. Elijah stood, barely. Smoke curled from the barrel of his Colt. Harker lay on his back, eyes open, mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite surprise and wasn't quite peace. Luwan exhaled. Property. Her voice cracked. They came that night. Not the law. Not really. Men who wear badges to hide the blood on their hands. Elijah sat across from her. One of them still in town. Got a busted rib now. That'd be Holt. She said, He's the tame one. You know who ordered it? Her gaze drifted to the door. Marshall Ridley. Out of Dry Fork. Runs a side business trading women west of the Divide. He sent them. I heard the name before I ran. Elijah exhaled slow. Dry Fork was 2 days' ride, 3 if the wind turned. You still running? Not anymore, she said. I'm done running. Outside, a rider appeared on the hill, just one, silhouetted against the bleeding sky. Then another, then 5. Looks like Ridley wants to tie up loose ends, she murmured. Elijah stood. Let him try. Inside, the saloon drew quiet. Guns shifted in holsters. The barkeep ducked behind the counter. Luwan rose beside him, her hand steady on her hip. How many? He asked. She squinted through the window. 8, maybe 10. Ridley's kind. Hired snakes. Elijah walked to the door. Then it's time they got bit. The first shot came like thunder cracking the bones of the land. Elijah didn't flinch. He raised his revolver and stepped into the dust. The street outside the saloon exploded with gunfire. Elijah moved low and fast, his revolver barking 3 times before the first man even hit the ground. Dust kicked up in violent swirls as hooves thudded and lead tore through the air like judgment. Luwan was at his side, rifle raised, eyes cold and calm. She dropped one rider clean off his saddle before the man could draw. Another spun his horse, tried to flee, but Elijah's bullet found his spine. The rest scattered, but they weren't gone. They were regrouping. Elijah ducked behind a water trough, panting through clenched teeth. Luan reloaded without a word. Her hands worked smooth, practiced. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" he asked between breaths. "I didn't," she said. "I learned to survive." From the corner of his eye, Elijah saw a man creeping along the edge of the smithy shotgun low. "Left," he growled. Luan turned and fired. The man dropped without a sound. Then silence, a heavy kind, like the world was holding its breath. Elijah stood slowly, scanning the hills. Nothing. Not yet. "They'll circle back," Luan said. "Try again after dark." Elijah nodded. "Let M. Next time we won't be here." "Where then?" she asked. He looked east. "Dry Fork. We take it to Ridley himself." By nightfall they were gone. Widow's Peak vanished behind them like smoke. They rode hard and quiet through red canyons and dry creek beds where wolves once howled. Elijah said little, Luan less. But something settled between them. Not peace, not trust, but a knowing. When they stopped to water the horses at a broken windmill, Luan broke the silence. "You don't have to do this." "Ben did," Elijah replied. "That makes it mine now. He died helping me." "He didn't have to." Elijah stared at the fire. "That's what makes it matter." The next day brought wind and heat, the kind that made a man taste dust for miles. Dry Fork rose out of the horizon like a sore tooth. Squat buildings, false law, and more rifles than prayers. Elijah knew the type of town. Money built it, fear kept it standing. They tied their horses just outside the edge and watched from a hilltop. "How many you think he's got with him?" Luan asked. "Enough to feel safe, not enough to expect a war." "What's the plan?" "We don't knock," Elijah said. "We kick the damn door in." At sundown they entered town like ghosts, slow, deliberate. No rush, no fear. People watched from windows but said nothing. A child clutched her mother's apron, eyes wide. At the far end, the sheriff's office stood like a lie wearing a badge. Elijah stepped up the wooden steps and pushed the door open. Inside sat Marshal Ridley, silver hair slicked back, boots on the desk, pistol on his hip. His smile was lazy and poisonous. "Well now," he drawled, "ain't this a surprise? You remember a woman with a red scarf?" Elijah asked. "I remember lots of things, most ain't worth repeating." "You sent men to Hollow Creek," Luan said coldly. "They killed Ben Granger." Ridley didn't blink. "Wasn't my fault he got tangled in business that wasn't his." Elijah stepped forward. "It is now." Ridley moved fast, faster than a man his age should. But Elijah was faster. One shot. Center chest. The marshal flew back in his chair, mouth open like he had one more lie to tell, but no breath left to shape it. The silence that followed was different than the others. Not heavy, not uncertain. This was the sound of something ending. Elijah holstered his revolver. Luan stared at the body for a long time. "Now what?" she asked. "Now we see who else crawls out when the dust settles." Outside, the sun bled over the ridge, and the town of Dry Fork stood still, like it finally remembered what fear felt like. They left Ridley's body where it fell. No one came running. No one screamed. Dry Fork wasn't the kind of town that cried for its dead, especially not the kind of dead who once traded people like cattle and carved law into whatever shape gold allowed. Elijah and Luwan walked back into the street beneath a sky gone rust-orange and heavy with dust. A few men leaned against railings, hats low, eyes lower. No one moved. Not until the undertaker shuffled out from behind the livery, wiping his hands with a soiled rag and muttering, "'Bout damn time," they rode out. At dusk the wind to their backs. Luwan didn't speak for miles, not until the stars began peeking through the soot-stained clouds. "You think it ends with him?" Elijah's jaw flexed. "No." "Then who's next?" "Whoever gave him permission." They made camp near a broken stream, dry as bone. Elijah built the fire. Luwan sat with her knees pulled to her chest, the red scarf around her neck like a brand of defiance. He glanced at her in the glow. She was younger than he'd first thought, but there was nothing soft left in her. Whatever life she'd lived before had burned out, left only stone and smoke behind. "Where were you from?" he asked. She shook her head. "Doesn't matter. Maybe not to you. Might to someone else." "There's no one left," she said. "They took my land, my mother, sold my sister east. I ran until I forgot what it meant to stay still." Elijah nodded. "And Ben gave you a reason to stop." "Yeah," she whispered. "He did." The fire cracked between them. Somewhere beyond the ridge a coyote howled, long and thin. Elijah tossed another branch onto the flames. "There's a man named Greeley," he said. "Railroad boss. Big money. Friends in government, judges, even a few marshals. Word is, he's the one Ridley worked for. Really wants land, doesn't care who's standing on it." "You think he gave the order?" "I think Ben got in his way." Lucy's face tightened. "Then he dies next." Elijah looked at her through the firelight. "You sure about that? I didn't come this far to stop halfway." They rode again at first light, toward Greeley, toward whatever hell waited behind his gates. The land changed the further north they went, greener, richer, but colder too. Towns became ranches. Ranches became estates. And with every mile, eyes followed them more. A rider passed them at midday, said nothing, but turned to look back twice. At a rest stop, a boy offered them water, then ran before they could ask his name. Fear was thicker here. Not loud, not angry, just constant. Like everyone had already been taught not to ask too many questions. At sundown they reached a rise overlooking the valley. Below stood Greeley's estate, bigger than a town, wrapped in white fences, guarded by men with rifles and faces carved from coin. Elijah scanned the grounds. "He's got a private army." Luwan grinned bitterly. "Then he won't mind a war." Elijah's hand rested on his revolver. "We don't walk in guns blazing. We find someone inside, someone who'll talk." "You trust someone like that?" "No," he said. "But I trust what fear does to men when they think they're next." They set up camp half a mile out, behind a knotted grove of cedar. Lujan tended the fire while Elijah cleaned his weapons. In silence, the sky stretched wide and uncaring above them. "You ever wonder if revenge is enough?" she asked suddenly. Elijah didn't answer right away. "Then it's not." "Then why keep going?" "Because if we stop now, all they'll remember is what was taken. I want them to remember who took it back." Somewhere beyond the trees, a twig snapped. Elijah's eyes darted to the dark. He reached for his rifle slowly, carefully. Another step. A shadow moved behind the brush. Then a voice, boyish, shaking. "Don't shoot." A figure stumbled forward, barely 16. Shirt torn, cheek bruised, eyes wild with something that looked like shame. "You the ones who shot the marshal in Dry Fork?" Elijah didn't answer. The boy swallowed. "If you are, then I think I can help." The kid's name was Daniel, or at least that's what he said. His voice cracked when he talked, not from youth alone, but from fear that had dug deep and made a home in his chest. He sat close to the fire, too close, warming hands that trembled like leaves before a storm. Luan watched him carefully, fingers resting near the knife on her belt. Elijah kept his rifle across his knees but made no move for it. "You worked for Greeley?" Elijah asked. Daniel nodded. "Stable boy, fed the horses, sometimes carried letters." "That's how I know." "Know what?" Luan asked. "That?" "He's got a list. Names, land deeds, people who won't sell, people who went missing." His voice dropped. Ben Granger was on that list. So was a preacher from St. Hollow, and a widow named Carmen Ruiz. None of 'em alive now. Elijah's jaw tightened. "You ever see Greeley sign anything?" "No," Daniel said. "He's smarter than that. Uses the ranch hands. Makes it look like accidents. Or Indians, or both." Luan leaned forward.